everyone, and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, a podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman-Taylor, and in this episode I talked with Michael Babienco about DotPurple, a cross-platform GUI-based .NET application which aims to make it easier to use the .NET CLI and manage new project templates and global tools. I'll let Michael explain it in a moment, but it was originally created to help reduce the brain space required to remember how to use the .NET CLI, whilst also boosting developer productivity and allowing developers to fall into the pit of success, rather than the pit of failure. Along the way, we also talked about helping to give back to the developer community via tools or mentoring. We also discussed the benefits and drawbacks of creating a cross-platform GUI-based .NET application and how when .NET Core was first released, there was no cross-platform GUI framework. These days, there are a lot of options, including Maui and Avalonia, which DotPurple uses. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I want to say, I always start the episodes like this, right? I always want to say thank you to everyone who's been on the show. So thank you ever so much, Michael, for taking some time out of your afternoon to come and talk to me about DotPurple. We'll get on to DotPurple in a minute, but I always like to start with a little bit of intro to the person that's come on. So thank you ever so much, Michael.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Okay, so before we get on to DotPurple and the wonderfulness that is, I was just wondering, could you give us a brief introduction, a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, and then we'll talk about DotPurple in a minute. Is that okay?
Yeah, so my name is Michael Babienco. I am a software contractor who works in Michigan in the United States. I've been doing software contract work for actually just about 10 years, and it's fun. You meet a lot of interesting people that way. I do a little IT on the side and pretend that I know how to use Windows Server and have a lot of fun doing development.
Cool. I think everyone pretends when they're having to deal with Windows Server. I think even Microsoft pretends, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. That's not to say that Windows Server is bad, but we'll let the listener draw their own conclusion.
Yeah. We won't get into that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's cool. So you've been contract-based development for around 10 years. That's pretty cool. I have no idea what the development experience in the United States is like, and obviously it will be different across multiple different states' boundaries. And because of that, I have no idea what the contracting experience is like. So that's pretty cool. But I'm a contractor myself, so every 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, I'm always meeting a new team and starting a new project or working on something completely new. So it's cool to be able to keep that sort of constant new project feel. I do have a few older projects to support every now and again, but most of the stuff I work on is sort of new stuff. So everyone loves working on new code, right?
Yeah. But the fun part is about contracting, at least in my experience, I haven't had the opportunity to use new technologies all the time because often the contractors, at least in my experience, just because of who we've worked with, they don't necessarily have a lot of money for support contracts after. So we tend to use more boring technologies that are more stable. So as much as I'd love to get to know maybe React or Flutter a little bit more closely than I do now, I haven't had the opportunity yet. But it's still fun. I definitely resonate with the new contract, new project idea every 6-8 months.
That's cool. I before I became a contractor, I sort of sated that desire by trying to build new projects in my own time. But obviously, the problem with that is, there's two problems. There's one of them is, let's go create React app, and then find that all of the tutorials are now wrong because it's been 30 seconds since the tutorial was released, right? I feel bad for picking on React, but any technology is like that, right? And the second one, of course, is that the majority of the tutorials you follow are, here's a hello world /to-do app, and that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Technology moving so quickly I mean, you look at iOS or Android, you've got new versions out every year, new APIs, new deprecations, and it's hard to stay on top of all of that.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It really is. I don't envy. So the Xamarin team, right? They need to know about these new APIs before the rest of the world, so that as soon as the public beta comes out, they have support for those new APIs, and they've removed the deprecated API. I can't understand how they keep on top of everything. I guess they get the insider track, but even so, that must be really difficult to keep track of, right?
Yeah, especially when things change in the gold master or final release candidates and things like that.
Yeah. I don't think I ever want to write software that requires other software to run, other than like a runtime, because that seems fraught with disaster.
Yeah, it's a little bit scary sometimes when you have to do that.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about DotPurple, if you don't mind. So I know that, in fact, there's an earlier episode of the podcast where I sort of geeked out about the .NET CLI with Dave Rail. And we just talked for about an hour about how cool it is, right? The difficulty with it, and I'm sure we'll come up to this, is discoverability, right? It's difficult to discover those new commands. But you can just literally do, like in the intro to the show, I say type in .NET new podcast, and that is literally how I spin everything up. When it comes to getting the editing together and doing the show notes and stuff and doing the transcription and stuff, I literally type in .NET space new space podcast, and everything is done for me. It's wonderful. But that requires a lot of effort from me to set up, right? But and obviously I can't tie that in Visual Studio, file new project, or in Rider, file new project, or whatever. But I've talked a lot about the CLI just now, right? And I feel like I'm prepping you a little bit. But firstly, what is DotPurple?
Yeah. So DotPurple is a well, actually, if we can back up for a minute and talk about the CLI just a little bit. The .NET CLI, before we say or before I imply that the .NET CLI is unnecessary or that it's too verbose or it's wrong or something, let's be clear that it is a necessary tool. It's wonderful. I hesitate to view an alternate reality where we're using MS Build for everything, and which of course has historical ties into Visual Studio. I don't know if it's cross-platform nowadays or not, but it gives developers the feeling .NET C# is Windows only, and so the CLI plus all the work they've done on .NET Standard, .NET Core, etc., has really opened up the .NET world to other developers, which is fantastic. So I want to be clear that I'm not downing the .NET CLI at all. It's great. It's a great tool. It's a wonderful tool. But just like other CLIs that you've probably used in the past, the .NET CLI, I say it suffers from three problems that pretty much many CLIs suffer from, and one is discoverability, which is what you've mentioned. It's you look at .NET and you go, okay, I've installed it. I've not looked at any documentation. What can it do? So you type in .NET. Okay, there's .NET-H. Okay, so you do .NET-H, and then it gives you all the under commands that you can do. Great, here's all the things I can do. But then you have to run help on each one of those commands just to see all of that. And so it's hard to discover everything that you can do just at a glance. The second problem that I sort of see there with CLIs in general is typos, which sounds like a small problem until you're doing a CLI command that takes 40 different flags or some long file path, and you forget to paste in something right, or you forget quote marks, and it's just a disaster. And then you're searching through your small little text there, wondering where on earth you made a typo, like some bad SQL query or something. The third issue that I kind of see with CLIs in general, and I would say the same thing about Git, for instance, and Git is a wonderful tool. But the third issue is user memory. When you have a command line that's as feature packed as the .NET command line, you have a bajillion options. You have many tools, kind of with all these options underneath each tool, and they don't necessarily cross-pollinate. And so it's difficult to remember everything in your brain until you do it every day or you do it every hour. And unfortunately, with a lot of these things, or at least one of the main parts of the tool is, using new projects, setting up new projects. You don't do that every day. And so as far as I am concerned, I don't want to have to look up the docs every single time I use a tool.
I mean, that's totally fair enough. I have to agree with with all 3 points, right? Like I said in the previous episode, episode 15, I think, so it's right at the beginning of the show's history. And if my maths is correct, because we record these ahead of time, this will be episode 82, right? So it's quite a while ago. And Dave Rail and I, we were talking about, the discoverability is the issue. Like you say, you do .NET. Okay, show me all the commands. Okay, right. So now I've got .NET New. That'll show me all of the projects I can use. Okay, .NET New MVC. Right. Okay, it takes a bajillion flags that are only, like you said, they don't cross pollinate. They're only relevant to that one project template. And that's a huge issue. And I totally agree with the typos, right? Especially if you have spaces in your file names. Now, I jump between Windows, Mac OS, and a Linux distribution. And if you're familiar with Unix like POSIX style files, if you have a space in the file and you're using Bash or any other kind of terminal, in Windows you just wrap the file in single quotes and it will deal with it. Fantastic. In Unix style terminals, you have to when you hit the space, you have to put / and then continue with the file name. So yeah, even the same CLI on different operating systems can give you issues you don't even know about. And like you say, you're sitting there scratching your head, going, "What? Why? Where's the rest of the file name?"
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So yeah, that's the CL, any CLI. And like you said, remembering commands, right? There's that stupid meme of, oh yeah, I'll just type in npm install. No, I'll push up 5,000 times and then hit return.
Yeah, and there's that excellent XKCD comic. I don't know if you see XKCD, where the guy is in front of the explosive device and someone says, help, and the other person says, help me. It says, enter a valid tar command. and the developer just backs up and says, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Yep. I always have to Google how to extract a tar ball from the command line. And like I'm forever copying files across the network to different machines. So I use SCP, which is a wonderful Bash, I believe it's Bash, app for copying over an SSH connection. Over a shush connection. And what's great about that is you SCP target colon the path you want and then the file you want to send, and it will do it. And the problem is I can never remember the order in which things go. So I just hit Control R, which is great for Unix style terminals because it's like a reverse search. I type in SCP and then hit return, watch it fail, and then go back and change the command because obviously the file name is different, right? And I do the same thing for rsync. So if I'm copying, I use it for copying across on the same machine but across different hard drives because then you get that sort of data integrity check. But I can never remember the command for that. So it's Control R, rsync, right, go, that'll do. And I don't want files laying around with how to run the command because then I've got to open the text file, scroll through, find it, copy it, paste it, change it, send it, and I end up sounding like a Daft Punk song. But yeah, I mean, CLIs are great for if you are scripting something, you can take the output of this one CLI command directly into the next one and chain them all together, and that's how you get DevOps, I'm pretty sure. But okay, so we've talked about CLIs, we've talked about how bad they are. Well, not bad, but how they can easily fall into some certain traps. So is this something that DotPurple fixes? I mean, or is it just, hey, just use DotPurple instead of the CLI and just don't worry about it? What is DotPurple and how does that solve that problem, I guess?
Yeah, so DotPurple is a desktop application built for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And its goal is to help you learn those CLI commands and manage your .NET projects. And you could think of it as a wrapper around the CLI. It does offer some more things beyond just the CLI, but its goal is to remove those issues that we just talked about. Discoverability. It's much easier to see on the screen all at once what you can do than have to hyphen help all the time. Typos. Well, we can't help you if you typo your own parameter name, but at least we'll remember your typo for you until you fix it. And user memory, we offer, saving and loading all your settings and stuff. So we try and tackle some of those issues that the CLI has, not only so that you as a developer can work with your projects better, but also so that new people who are not used to .NET or the .NET ecosystem can start using .NET and C# and F# and all those wonderful languages more quickly and get up to speed more easily. So yeah, in short, it's a graphical user interface that helps you use the .NET command line.
Okay. So here's a question for you then. Those issues of the CLI to one side, the discoverability, the typos, and the user memory, right? If I can go into Visual Studio and I can go File New, and there's a WYSIWYG stuff. I'm not a fan of Visual Studio only because it does too many things. Right? It's like carrying around a Swiss Army kitchen rather than a Swiss Army knife, right? And so it does too many things, in my opinion. It's a bit bloated in that respect. It's a great tool, but it just does too many things. But if I can go File New Project, what do I get out of DotPurple that I may not get out of File New Project in Visual Studio, Rider, whatever, or indeed Visual Studio Code?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I haven't used Rider myself, so I won't speak to that. Let's be clear. But in Visual Studio, up until I think version 16.8, I believe it was. It may have been in preview before that. But it didn't actually load your .NET templates. It just had the built-in, WPF, API, MVC API, etc. It didn't actually load those at all. Mm-hmm. And so that was obviously a problem. And so .Purple was actually created before that started to get integrated into Visual Studio. Things have started to get integrated. It's actually improved a little bit. If you now go in version 16.9, if you go File New Project, it'll load up some new things. For instance, if you used the box.templates or something like that.
The box.net.
Box.net.
Yeah, those are the ones. Yeah, they're great because they're sort of opinionated, get you started really quickly. You just push a button and you get the standard ASP.NET stuff, but you also get mapping for your models and all that kind of stuff sort of built in.
Right. So if you have that template installed in your computer and you go into Visual Studio and you load it up, it will show you some of the options. But here's the unfortunate side effect of that, is that they're all in one big long list. There's no nice text wrapping or anything. If you make the window bigger, you can't really see more unless you have vertical height to share. There's no help text. And there's no way to remember what you've done afterwards. So that's a very unfortunate thing about just the .NET New project. But then if you look at the other parts of the CLI, there's, for instance, .NET New Build. There's at least 18 options, 18 different flags that you can use for that. Run, 18 actions. .NET Publish, 24. We could go on and on. But those aren't available in Visual Studio. So whatever the reason is for that, maybe it needs to add a new add-on to the Swiss Army kitchen. But that kitchen doesn't have all the tools that we need yet. And so unfortunately, the reality is that the Visual Studio doesn't cover all the features that the CLI does. And we're trying to cover some of those features in .Purple, not only for Windows and Mac, where Visual Studio has been for many years, but also Linux as well.
Okay. Yeah. From my part, like I said, Visual Studio is great. It's a little bit bloated, but I did find, when .NET Core first when they were the first grumblings, I like to say, about .NET Core, I was already a Linux user. My daily driver is a Linux distro, right? So I was like, finally, I can actually do .NET development on my Linux-based machine and not have to use Mono. There's nothing inherently wrong with Mono, except that it suffers from the same problems that Visual Studio does. It's incredibly bloated, but that's my opinion. But, Miguel, come and shout at me if you want. But, I was like, hey, first-class support for this operating system that Microsoft isn't known for supporting for a while. Okay, fair enough. And, I got the CLI up, and I'm like, yeah, brilliant, and Visual Studio Code, and off I go. And then a couple of my friends who are Windows devs fired up Visual Studio, and they're like, wait, Visual Studio doesn't have .NET Core as a first, like it's not first party supported. It's not a first class citizen. What the heck? But I guess that's because there's a billion different teams in Microsoft all working on different products, and synchronizing that must be super difficult to do, right? If I'm working with a team of 5 people, that's difficult to synchronize. So if I've got a team of 25 engineers who are communicating with 25 other engineers, and we're working on legacy code bases everywhere, I can understand that things. I'm not trying to defend Microsoft, but I totally understand that their file new wizard needs a little bit of work, is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way.
Yeah. And, it just takes time with these big corporations sometimes. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we're all celebrating because Visual Studio 2022 will be in 64-bit. Finally.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's been how many years since people have been asking for that? So these things just take time. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, I'm thankful for other developers who create tools that help us get up to speed on things. And so we're just trying to help people where Visual Studio doesn't cover yet.
Sure. So let's say I've gone and created. I load up DotPurple. I fill in all of the checkboxes. I push whatever buttons I need to do. Out pops my project. I close DotPurple and I go away from DotPurple forever, right? Because, like you said, how often do I fire up a new project, or is that not the case? Can I do everything from within DotPurple? Do I keep using how? I'm trying to ask, I guess, without. I don't like using the word why, right? But with that being said, why would I keep using DotPurple?
Yeah. So once you add your project, obviously that's one of the biggest problems with using the .NET CLI is making those projects with all the settings. But like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, there's still a myriad of options under .NET Run, .NET Publish, .NET Restore, and so we offer graphical the GUI for those items as well. And so let's say, for instance, you want to run or publish your app. Let's go with publishing your app on Mac and Linux and Windows. So with DotPurple, you can actually set up profiles, one for Windows, one for Mac, one for Linux. Check all your checkboxes differently under each profile, and then click Publish All, and it will just do all the work for you in one click. And you don't have to remember all your flags. You don't have to remember all your settings. So if you're asking yourself the reason why keep using it, it's because of all the other things you do besides creating projects, where you will still be using the .NET command line or the features that the .NET command line offers, but you don't want to remember all the flags. You don't want to remember all the new things that it offers, the options you have. And it's an easy way also to prototype. Again, publishing, just because that's an easy one to pick on. For instance, there's an option for a single file publish, which was updated and improved in .NET 5. Well, what if your app doesn't work with that? What if it does work with that? What if you want to install a .NET 6 preview and see if it still works, or see if the bug is fixed there? Well, you install the preview, you check the box, you see if it works. Okay, it doesn't work, you uncheck it, you're done. You don't have to worry about learning the flags or anything. And if it does work, you just hit save, and then you don't have to remember that you turned it on. So yeah, it's useful for all the other commands that you do. And just for fun, the best way to test to see if your app is useful is to use it on your own project. And so on Mac, DotPurple actually publishes, builds, and packages its own application file, all in one big step. And so it's useful. I keep hitting on publishing, but it's useful for other things too.
Sure.
No,
that makes sense. If there's a path that makes sense to use to show off all of the features of an app, let's talk about that path, right? That makes sense to me, right? If you could do all of the other things too, brilliant. But if there's a complex example, let's talk about that complex example. And publishing is a complex example.
Yeah. Just as another example, we were talking about the custom templates a couple minutes ago. Just as an example, .NET New MVC has 21 different options. Mm-hmm. The box templates for the .NET Core API has 32. And so to sit down and have help text for all of that on one screen instead of just one big long list with no text wrapping or things like that, at least I see that as very useful.
Sure, yeah. And it is... So I'm a very big proponent. When people say to me, "Oh, I'm a command," what's the phrase that a friend of mine calls it? Command line commando. And I'm like, sure, that's fine. If you want to be a command line commando, fantastic. But you know what? It's really easy for me to click on that button there and it just does it all for me, right? And I'm at a point with myself where my opinion is, if I'm going to use a tool to increase that productivity, if that tool does that, then let's use it. If it's more productive for me to do git add file name, file name, file name, file name, 12 bajillion file names later, return, or if it's more productive for me to go into a GUI and go tick, 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 commit, then I'm going to pick the path that with the least amount of effort required and does everything I want. And, it sounds like, from what you're saying there with the .NET box templates, if I've got to remember 34 different switches and I have to have them written down in front of me, or I can tick a bunch of boxes, add some text, and hit go. I'm going to tick the boxes, add the text, and hit go, right? I'm lazy, and that's just me.
Yeah, and that's also the beauty of being a developer, is that you find the workflow that works for you, and you run with it. And hopefully you document it so whoever comes after you can also do the same thing.
Absolutely. So one question that I have based on what we've said so far, right? Putting the DevOps hat on, right? If I want to have repeatable builds that I can do at the push of a button, and I need to remember the 40 different switches for .NET Publish, is there a way in .purple to export those so that makes it easier? Or does it show me the command it's running just so then I can copy paste that into my GitHub action or into my MS build action or into my Jenkins or whatever? Or is it a case of, is there a .purple that's headless that I can install there and then just run it from the command line? What's the path there?
So .purple actually shows a console or a console lookalike on the bottom of the screen. And so it actually spits out all the commands that it does, right. Just about, other than, boring file copy operations and things like that. So it spits out those operations so that you can actually copy paste them, like you said, into a GitHub action or something. And that's also kind of where the educational aspect comes into it, because you can just fiddle with things and see what happens. You can see what the output is. So as far as exporting things to files, yes, we do offer that. Right now, it's a paid feature, just so that you can share it with people. We have to limit some things just so we can get some of our funds back. But yes, you could just copy paste, send it over text message or whatever it is from the command line right there. So.
Okay, that's cool, because that was something that was going off in the back of my head. I'm like, if I'm using this wonderful GUI tool, I'm going to repeatedly build that in GitHub Actions. But like you say, if you can copy paste the commands out, then it helps with that. And like you say, it'll help you to figure out what the commands actually are as well. That's immediately useful. And if let's just take another one of those .NET MVC, right? You go .NET. So if listener, if you're at your computer, bring up the terminal, type in .NET space new space MVC -H, and watch all of the command options get spat out, right? Now, if you're trying to quickly iterate on that, oh, well, it's one of these. No, it's one of those. No, it's one of those, right? Whereas if, from what you said there, Michael, I can fire up .purple, check a bunch of boxes, hit go, there's my project. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted. Check a bunch of different boxes, hit go. Nope, that's still not what I wanted. Check a bunch of boxes, hit go. Oh, there it is. That's the project that I want, right? Right,
exactly.
That's cool. And you said earlier when it has support for those custom templates that people can build as well.
Yeah. We do a lot of testing just to make sure that the box templates work. But yeah, it should have support for custom templates. In fact, we rolled out some improvements to that feature just today. Today, the day the podcast is recording, of course. And we support custom templates. And we actually also do a lot of work with helping you manage your .NET tools as well. So beyond all your CSproj, FProj, project files, your code, as it were, .purple is also very useful to manage your templates, like we just mentioned, as well as your tools, your command line tools. So if you've ever forgotten, I remember I installed this tool 3 months ago and I used it once. What was the name of it? I can't remember for the life of me. You can sit down, click a button, go to the tools list, see all the list of all your tools you've got installed. all right there in front of you. So templates and tools is the other thing beyond just projects that DotPurple focuses on.
That's really useful too. I have to agree that I've written so many single-use .NET Global tools for stuff, and it's for silly things like media conversion, right? I don't want to have to remember FFmpeg input file, a whole string of. It's that same argument, right? User memory and all that kind of stuff. A whole string of parameters, output file. I've got a media conversion app. Because obviously, being part of the podcast, one of the things you do is you take the raw audio, convert it to MP3, right? So I've got an app. I just type in converter space MP3, and it takes any wave, FLAC, whatever files it finds that are not MP3s, and converts them to MP3s in that directory. Because I'm not going to remember all of these commands. So that would be useful for remembering, install that on all my machines. Do I have converter installed here? Nope. Do I have .NET Format installed here? No. Okay. How do I generate my editor configs? Well, that's with .NET Format. Let's create all these. That sounds really useful. I've got to say, yeah.
The other thing that we put in just for fun, and we don't actually have a lot of statistics on how people use .purple because I don't like tracking people.
Yeah.
So we have very minor analytics, but we also have a list that's open source on our GitHub of all these .NET tools on NuGet. And so you just load up .purple, you load up that list, and you can just search and see what's available. So for instance, if you search Amazon, it'll come up with a couple of .NET tools for Amazon right there in the list, and you can just one-click install them. So it's great for discovery. Great for discovery, great to get started and see if something is out there.
That's really useful too, because I think that's a problem that I feel Microsoft haven't solved yet. They've said, hey, create all these global tools and throw them up on NuGet and then install it on your machine, right? And it's like, well, that's great, but how do I search for the global tools on NuGet.org? I can't. How do I search for the global tools within the .NET CLI? I can't, right? How do I know if there is a global tool for converting media? I don't know. I've got to know it and find it.
Yeah, I think NuGet.org actually very recently added template searching and .NET tool searching. But you have to go down into the filters and do it that way. And so it's not necessarily intuitive to find it. But to Microsoft's credit, they do have a way to search for that. And I think the .NET CLI might have it now. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't used it myself. So,
well, let's say this, right? Neither of us know for sure.
Well,
so
and there's
no way
the
to
clue.
find that out.
Yeah, exactly, right. There's the clue for how the developer world feels about it. They just don't know.
Exactly. I mean, this is just us two talking, so we don't represent all the developers in the world. But in our opinions, we don't know whether it exists or not.
Well, clearly, once two people say something, it's the truth. You post it on the internet, so
that's it, right? That's it. It's a really good thing I don't have comments on the website. No. So we've got projects, we've got tools, we've got custom templates. But you've said so far a couple of times, and we kind of breezed past it real quick, just because we're in that world now. .NET is now cross-platform. You said earlier on, if you're using MS Build, you have this feeling like you're tied to Windows, but you don't. And I feel like, to Microsoft's credit, they've done what they can. I feel like there's a lot of .NET is Windows only still, so that's a bit of a shame, really. But we're getting there with that. I have no affiliation with Microsoft, but I feel like we're getting there as a community of educating people that, hey, no, .NET is this thing that you can run on Windows, you can run it on Mac, or pretty much any Linux distribution. But there are some caveats there. Obviously, if you roll your own, it's likely not going to work. Or if you're using the bleeding edge or a distro from like 15 years ago, it's probably not going to work. But, that's fine. But because .NET is cross-platform, .purple is as well? Because we sort of breezed past it, right?
Yeah. So .purple does run on Windows and Mac OS and Linux, although I couldn't tell you how many Linux distributions it does run on or doesn't run on. Ubuntu, of course, is the popular choice.
Sure.
But yeah, it does run on all three operating systems, and which is great because Visual Studio isn't even offered on Linux. But it does run across all three.
That's got to have been a difficult problem to solve, right? Because I remember when .NET Core was first sort of being talked about, and everyone was like, "Cool, we can do Windows Forms on Linux," and they were all like, "Hold up, 1 second here. And there's still like you still can't do Windows specific things and that totally makes sense. You're never going to get the Windows APIs on Linux. But then, we're moving forward towards a situation where there is a cross-platform, a first-party cross-platform UI in the way of, I believe it's called Maui,
Yes.
which
Yes.
the current version, I believe, is just Xamarin so far. But there's talk of bringing other things in and making, lots of things that are multi-application user interface or multi-platform application user interface, I believe it's called. So that's cool. Is DotPurple Maui or is it something else?
Yeah, so DotPurple was actually around before Maui was announced. It does seem like a great technology. I haven't used it personally. But DotPurple is actually built on two technologies, one WPF, and we can get back to that. But the cool thing that it runs on is Avalonia, a project called Avalonia UI, which is a cross-platform desktop C# XAML-based development framework, very similar to WPF. And you instinctively think, when you hear cross-platform, you wonder, hey, does it work on mobile too? And the answer with Avalonia is, it's in beta, closed beta, alpha, maybe. But as far as desktop goes, it runs very well. And basically, you pick your development environment, do all your programming, and you can expect, generally speaking, that it will work on the other two operating systems. If you're on Mac, it'll work on Windows, Linux, and vice versa.
Okay. So, you see, because that is that's something that like I say, when .NET was first announced, they were like, hey, we need some kind of UI thing for multi-platform, and all of the Microsoft folks were like, no, that's too difficult at the moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, people are still calling for cross-platform WPF even today. Everyone says, well, it's dependent on DirectX, and like you mentioned a moment ago, the Windows APIs, etc. But clearly, there's a demand for it. But that demand hasn't fully been met, although Maui is coming.
I have looked into Avalonia, and I'm really impressed with what they have, I have to say. I'm trying to track someone down, so maybe if there's someone on the Avalonia team listening in, hey, get in touch. We need to talk about this stuff. But, I'm not as famous as .NET Rocks or Hadselman, so maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. We'll see. But, okay, so we've got Avalonia for, did you say it was just for Mac OS and the Linuxes, and the Windows version is WPF?
Yeah, so DotPurple, okay, let's be clear here. Avalonia runs across all three. But DotPurple's kind of not so secret is that actually for Windows it uses WPF. And there were a couple reasons for that. One, WPF is what I was historically familiar with. So I wanted to make sure that if the whole cross-platform thing didn't work out, that we'd at least have Windows software. So that was sort of a business decision at the beginning. But let's just be honest, and in fact, it runs on WPF.NET Framework, not .NET Core. So it's kind of ironic. It's kind of a funny thing. But there are some things about that setup that you can't beat with .NET Core, with .NET 5+. My installer for DotPurple is like 15 megs.
Right.
And there's no dependencies for Windows 10 users to install because .NET Framework 4.8 comes installed on Windows 10. And so, updates are small. It's pretty stable. It's very, very stable. I don't have to worry about it updating every year. So in that sense, .NET Framework WPF was a great choice. Now, moving forward, of course, now as they're starting to iterate quicker on .NET 5, .NET 6, etc., it's a bit harder to make that business decision. But, back a year and a half ago now when we were just conceptualizing this, it made a lot more sense. Back then, when, WPF first came out on .NET Core on version 3, I think.
It was, yeah.
And so version 3 came out, I think, just a couple months before we conceptualized .Purple. And so we weren't sure yet if it really should be. And so we decided, let's do a test. Let's build the main Windows app where most developers are going to be on WPF. And then use a shared code project and have an Avalonia version as well. And so that's kind of where the WPF Windows, Avalonia, Mac, and Linux .Purple came about. And for the record, it does work wonderfully. The Avalonia build works wonderfully on Windows. We just choose not to deploy that.
I mean, that's fair enough, right? If you, it goes back to the beginnings of .NET, right? .NET was one of those languages that was created as a rapid application development tool set, right? You want to get a web server up and running, fine. It's like 12 lines of code done, right? And because before then, if you're building a custom web server, you either had to use someone else's web server and modify it, or write it all in C, C++, maybe one of those languages that nothing is provided for, or rather there are libraries, but hardly anything is provided for you. No memory management, all that kind of stuff. So let's get you started real quick with this. It's memory managed. It has garbage. Well, it has garbage collection, which is obviously memory management. It's got all of these libraries already created for you. It's all built in, and then in the behind the scenes, we'll continue to build our operating system with it. So that sort of proves that how good it is. So when you come to create an initial proof of concept, why not use a pre-existing technology? Because, like you say, you've got to get to the point where it's usable first, right? You can spend months working on a UI, and if the software isn't usable, all you've got is a very shiny painting without a wall behind it, right?
Right, exactly. And that's actually where Avalonia shines a little bit, because Avalonia, like I mentioned a moment ago, is XAML based. And so you can actually take your WPF, your view models, your models, etc. Since it's all C#, it's not very expensive as a business decision to say, okay, can we recreate our UI in Avalonia, and suddenly it's cross-platform. If your libraries are not cross-platform, you're going to have some different issues.
Sure.
But if you're just using core C#, core normal WPF, actually, you can just start building your UI on top of your existing code base, essentially, and start iterating from there.
Yeah, and that's just standard application design. Just how do I put it?
Separation of concerns.
Yeah, right. That's just standard application design stuff that leads to separation of concerns. If you put your UI code in a UI area, and you have your core logic in a core logic area, and you have good enough interfaces, it shouldn't matter which UI you're using, because all you're doing is poking at an interface. And then you could build. I suppose, if you really wanted to, you could then go and rebuild the UI in something completely different, like maybe Electron, as long as you're using the same interfaces. I mean, I don't wish anyone to use Electron, but I haven't had a lot of success using Electron in the past. I'm not picking on it, but if you then wanted to build it in GTK Shop, you just add that extra layer and you're done, right? Or, like you said, if you want to build a Xamarin, let's say for some reason you wanted to get it working on an Android or an iOS phone that uses some kind of WebSocket to talk to a server which has the .NET CLI on it, you could maybe just throw Xamarin in front of it and you're good to go, right?
Right, yeah. And so we all know as programmers that the earlier we start programming right, the better off we are in the future. And so I really like the concept of what we call technical debt. Mm-hmm. We can all choose to go into debt as programmers and choose to, just throw everything together in one giant file, and it works. Let's call it a day. Let's never touch it again. And sometimes that's appropriate. Let's not be wrong here. But oftentimes we're going to revisit that code next week, next month, next year. And the more we go into debt and don't pay off our technical debt, the worse off we'll be, and the more we'll hate our past selves.
Yep, I agree. So then I guess that's why you guys spent the time to separate out. You took that core logic, put that to one side, build a UI in WPF because we can, and then let's go have a look at Avalonia. Oh wait, it's XAML based. Hey, guess what? I could probably just copy paste a whole bunch of stuff over, right?
Yeah, and that's the fascinating part. We started when Avalonia was still in version 0.9. They're currently in version 0.10. And so they were still working on porting over some controls like WPF's label. But generally speaking, once I got used to it, you could actually just take your XAML WPF, your WPF XAML, copy paste it over, adjust some things, maybe tweak a few names in case you had to do something, Avalonia specific. And then it just worked. It was amazing. And so it's a beautiful way to expand your WPF knowledge into Mac and Linux, in my opinion.
That's great. I do like that, being able to just copy paste, tweak a few things, and then it just works, right? That was like some of my early .NET Core apps were, how do I take this framework thing and make it run on Core? Well, luckily, because I've separated everything out, this chunk works fine. This chunk works fine. This bit doesn't work. Okay, fair enough. We'll figure that out, right? And I really like that, being able to swap technologies without really having to worry about that kind of thing. But I do have a question, though. Okay, so let's say we've got the WPF and we've got the Avalonia, right? Why build two different versions of it? Why not build three, right? Why not build one, right? So there's two questions there, right? Do you guys envision, or rather, do the folks building it envision taking the WPF and the Avalonia and going, look, we can have this, or we can have this, and it will be a smaller code base? I think you touched on this earlier on. The Windows install is 15 megs. That's hardly anything these days. And then the second question is, why not have a Windows version, a Linux version with one of the million different Linux UI toolsets, and a Mac version that uses, is it Cocoa? Or am I talking really old Mac there if I say Cocoa?
No. It's Cocoa. That's correct. Yeah. So great question. And as far as the WPF Avalonia thing goes for .Purple, yeah, I think once we can make the decision to move everything to .NET 5 Plus, I think the logical decision is let's move everything to the Avalonia code base. Let's have one single UI front end. We've discussed some of the business decisions before, why we chose to do it in .NET Framework before. One of the other ones that is no longer true, actually, was performance. Avalonia has done a lot to improve their performance between .9 and .10. And in fact, .Purple, we built it on their master branch, against their master branch, so that we could keep getting those performance improvements. But they've done a lot of impressive work, removing link queries, optimizations here, there, and everywhere. A lot of impressive work to improve their performance. And so I think the logical next step for .Purple itself is, okay, once everything is ready with Avalonia, which it is / it will be whenever we choose to take the time to do it, let's move everything to Avalonia. Let's have a single code base, because that just makes sense from a business perspective. You don't want to learn two UIs. You don't want to learn to use WPF and Avalonia. You just want to learn to use one. As far as your other question about building one software package for each platform, it's an interesting question because I actually have done that. I built for Windows and Mac, we used native applications, WPF on Windows, and Cocoa for Mac, and then a cross-platform business logic, C++ backend. So the great part about what that was that the business logic was wonderful to work with. You fix a bug once, it's fixed everywhere. You're great. In fact, we use that backend on mobile as well. And so you fix that bug once in the business logic, and it's great. But the problem is that, in my experience anyway, once you start getting more complex in the user interface, with Cocoa, with WPF, with GTK, any framework, you start to get into those, why on earth is that happening issues. Those really quirky workarounds that you have to do, where you sit there scratching your head for 30 minutes. And then, okay, you want everything to look the same on every platform. Okay, so now we have to sit there and rewrite the UI in 5 different ways. And let's find a library for grid logic. Okay, we use this library for grid logic here on Mac, and this library on WPF, and this library on mobile. And so it quickly becomes I hate to say it, but a kludgy mess. And unless, in some sense, it's a business decision, right? If you already have dedicated Windows developers, dedicated Mac developers, and dedicated Linux developers, and they're not going anywhere in the next 10 years, okay, the most optimal way to write your software would be to have a unique piece of software for every platform, because you're going to be able to take advantage of the native APIs the easiest, the native platform optimizations the easiest, et cetera, et cetera. But often, as we well know in the contracting business, companies don't necessarily have all the money in the world, and companies may not have developers for every platform, or may not want to support further support contracts on every platform. And so that's where these cross-platform solutions really come into play. And why I think, again, it's a business decision, why we should use them.
Yeah, again, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I feel like it was kind of like a leading question, right? Almost everyone who builds cross-platform apps will take as much of it out to make it cross-platform as possible to make that job easier, right? And then let's say you've done that where you've got WPF, you've got Cocoa for macOS, you've got GTK for all of the Linuxes, right? What happens when someone brings out a new Linux? What happens when someone brings out a new desktop environment for Linux? What happens when Apple come out with a brand new version of macOS and deprecate a whole bunch of stuff from Cocoa, right? Does that mean that all of your users now have to move to the latest and greatest macOS to be able to keep using your application? And as much as Apple, I mean, they do push out updates quite often, but it's not, how do I put it? It's not enforced upon you as much as, say, with the Windows updates are, right? The Mac OS update can come out and it can be like, yeah, you install it whenever you want. It's not a problem. Because the majority of developers have had that update for 6 months, but have not actually bothered to update their software yet. And you update and then nothing works. But that happens. That I feel like I'm picking on Mac there. It's not just an Apple problem. That's a every operating system ever problem, right? You'll get the lazy developers who'll go, nobody's using my app, or it's no, there'll be no breaking changes. Just install it. Oh, right, nothing works. Oh, wow, and I'm getting this really weird exception, or this really weird. Why am I getting a null ref? Why am I getting a Stack Overflow? That doesn't make sense. All it's doing is drawing a button, but you've used some kind of compatibility API that no longer exists, right? So I think for the majority of developers, it all makes sense to have a perhaps not as well optimized as the native binaries, but an optimized format that is cross-platform. That just makes business sense. It makes developer sense, and it fits with the idea we were talking about earlier on about developer brain space, right? I don't need to remember how to do things on Cocoa. I don't need to remember how to do things. Oh, right, my users just installed Wayland instead of GNOME. That throws everything out of the window. If you don't know what those things are, then good, that's brilliant. You don't live in the Linux world. You don't have to worry about that. But and then some bright spark goes, oh, I want to run it on a server which doesn't have a desktop. You know, it all just falls over. But I think, like I say, it was a leading question about why not develop um, three separate application code bases. I feel like I was going to ask about the pros and cons of using Avalonia, but we've kind of hit upon that. It's, pros are cross-platform, cons maybe not as optimized as the default binaries for your operating system, but it allows you to just push a button and out pops your executable, right?
Right. And, that is one of the wonderful things about building on the .NET platform nowadays is as much as we might dislike the new versions coming out every year, the .NET team has made a lot of strides the last, year or three with performance. And the fact that we now have a UI framework, an upcoming MAUI and things like that, that just run on top of all those improvements, you can basically, as long as all the compatibility stays the same, get better performance with very little effort. And so it's wonderful to be able to use the .NET ecosystem in that way.
Absolutely. I remember when I was talking to JD of the Ryujin team, that's a Nintendo Switch emulator written entirely in .NET, which makes it inherently cross-platform. And he was saying that the team that work on Ryujin were feeding back to Microsoft saying, hey, we think that, because obviously when you're emulating a piece of hardware, speed is of the essence, performance is of the essence, right? So they were feeding back with hints and tips about, hey, point your profilers at this area of .NET and you'll notice it's not running that great. And then Microsoft go, or the open source folks that work on it go and make those changes. And then guess what? We all get that performance benefit for free. So we may not be building emulators for handheld consoles. We may be building business line apps, or like you, Michael, we may be building GUI applications that let us build our templates out and manage our tools a lot better. But we'll get those performance upgrades if we want them for free. And I absolutely love that. One of the things that is that there's the developer maxim of the three difficult things in development is naming things, cache invalidation, and off by one errors, right? But we all know that updating your software is nigh on impossible. I was wondering whether you could talk to us a little bit about how .purple is updated, right? Because I just download the exe, I run it on my computer. Oh, well, I go back to the website at some point in the future. There's another exe, I download it, run it on my computer, right? That's how it works, right? That's how all the software updates work, right?
Yeah, if only it were that easy. If only everything was managed automatically for you. Oh wait,
Mm-hmm.
that's your browser, your software as a service systems. So obviously, desktop applications have a whole nother world of running updates, keeping your software up to date, getting your users to actually update your software. Mac has actually had a great solution to this for a long time. I think over a decade, although I could be wrong on that point. Many apps that you use on Mac will use a software platform called, or not a software platform, a software library called Sparkle. Maybe many users out there who use a Mac might have applications that make use of Sparkle. It's your very simple, upload your application file up online, upload your release notes. Your software checks an XML file, checks the binary hashes, downloads it, installs the update, and it just works. I remember the first time I integrated Sparkle into some software, from 0 to done and working was 2 hours.
Wow.
And I never used it before. I mean, it was really impressive. Really, really impressive how quickly and easily I was able to integrate it into my software. But the unfortunate part is that is native Mac binaries, libraries code. And so .purple on Mac actually uses Sparkle. We figured out a way to get .purple, the .purple C# code to call into the native binary and run things normally. And so that works really well. It's battle tested. Sparkle library is battle tested. But for Windows and Linux, it's kind of a different story. So I'm actually also the maintainer / sort of author of a library called Net Sparkle Updater, which runs on .NET Core. So it's all three platforms. And it's there to help you manage your software updates. Now, we all know that Windows is a nightmare when it comes to installing software. I don't do IT every day, but I know, pushing out updates to software and everything. On Mac, you have a single file, essentially. You have your .app file. You just shove it over, you copy paste, it works. Everything is self-contained. On Windows, you have EXE, you have MSI, you have Electron apps, you have apps that put yourself in My Documents, apps that put yourself in roaming app data, etc. And so it's basically a nightmare. So NetSparkle, this library that we use on Windows and Linux, is less concerned with actually installing the update and more concerned about getting the update for you and checking for updates. And so it does a very similar thing to Sparkle. You give it your XML, your appcast URL, you give it your private key, public key pair, and it generates the files for you that you need to put on your web server. You put them up on your web server. NetSparkle will check for updates, tell the user, hey, there's updates. You want to download it? Here are the release notes. You hit, yes, I want to download and install. It downloads. And then you, as the developer, hopefully have rigged up an installer that works on Windows for your software, whether it's an MSI or an EXE or whatever it is. I use iKnow Setup just because it's, again, battle tested. It works great. And so it just downloads an iKnow Setup installer. It installs, and iKnow Setup takes care of restarting the software for me. So we use NetSparkle Updater for that. It's a great little library. Of course, I'm a little bit fond of it because I helped. I maintain it. I say I wrote it, but that's not exactly true. A guy, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, wrote it, but then stopped maintaining it, and it got forked on GitHub, and then that fork got forked, and then that fork got forked, and finally I said, okay, enough is enough, and I kind of took it under my wing. But that's what .purple uses for its software updates. Again, a true cross-platform software update framework would be really hard just because there's so many intricacies in distribution formats. I mean, Mac, you have app notarization. That's a huge issue. And if you don't know what that is and you don't have to deal with it, please don't Google it. You'll get into a deep pit. So there's a lot of difficult things on each platform that you have to worry about. So it'd be really, really hard to have a true cross-platform plug-and-play that worked perfectly everywhere. If Microsoft wants to hire somebody to do that, great, more power to them.
Yeah, again, that totally makes sense, right? The three major. I don't like to refer to Linux as an operating system, but it fits when I say the three main operating systems, right? Windows, Mac, and the Linux distributions. even within the Linux distributions, they all have their own ways of installing software, right? If you follow the Debian path where Ubuntu lives, then you're using deb packages, right? But we've got Flatpaks, we've got oh my goodness, app images, we've got snap packages now. There's hundreds of different ways to install software, all each with their own caveats, strengths, and weaknesses, and that's great. But then, like you say, managing that upgrade path for one application becomes more difficult, and all you're doing is targeting one. Like I say, the Linux distributions, right? You're then targeting that one format, for want of a better phrase, and that becomes a trivial problem in itself. And then you throw in Mac, and you've got, like you say, the app notarizations. You've got, if you want to go down the App Store route, you then maybe have to start charging to cover that. But and then you get Windows, which is a completely different other beast. And like I say, I'm not trying to pick on any of them, but yeah, it's difficult to maintain.
Yeah.
I do remember watching a friend of mine try and then struggle to get something with Squirrel working, and that was a multi-week job. And then they ended up giving up and just like, we'll get them to sign up to a mailing list and we'll just email them when a new version comes out. Because that seemed easier and quicker.
Yeah, and that's why with NetSparkle Updater, that library, that C# lib, we decided not to handle the actual update itself. We just handle let's check for updates, let's find the RSS feed or whatever it is, let's download the update, and then the developer's in charge of actually running that update, just because it's going to be different everywhere and for every piece of software.
Sure. So there's lots of, I don't want to say moving parts. I feel like that's the wrong word to use, but maybe it is the right word to use. With DotPurple, which is, and here come the bunny quotes, just an application that wraps around the CLI, right? Hopefully you all heard those bunny quotes, because there's a lot more to DotPurple than that. We've already discussed that, right? There's a lot of different parts that you're touching on that maybe a standard enterprise level application should be taking into account. It's got full cross-platform support. It's got separating the core logic from the UI. It's got an automatic. Well, there's a question: is it an automatic updater or a manual updater? Right? I'm using DotPurple. It's running, and then all of a sudden, an update is pushed to the server. My DotPurple talks to the server and says, "Hey, there's an update." Do I then get told, or does it just automatically update when it next reboots? What's that path like? I mean, you said there it's up to the developer to handle that, but what's the path like for DotPurple?
Yeah, so for DotPurple, it'll actually tell you. It'll pop up a little window, and you can actually say, remind me later if you don't want to install it now. That way you can finish up all your work. The library does have a very dangerous option of kill your software and reinstall without telling the user. And, there's warnings and whatever in the docs. But DotPurple, it warns the user. You'll know when you install an update. If you don't want to install an update, you can avoid that for whatever reason you choose.
Sure. Okay. So that's that side of it then. So you've got cross-platform UI with currently a Windows UI and a Mac and Linux UI. You've got an auto updater that can auto update if it wants, but it lets the user know. These are things that I feel like enterprise applications should know about, especially a desktop-style enterprise application, something like Chrome or Firefox that can update in the background. These are things that I would expect those applications to worry about, and not necessarily here come those bunny quotes again. Just an application which wraps around the CLI. What I'm getting at is I'm really impressed with the way that, at least from the way you've described it, that this application has been engineered, that you've come across these problems and gone, right, how do I solve this? How do I get past this? Right, okay, here's another problem. How do I solve this? How do I get past this? And it feels, from the way you've described it, very much like it's less the one single file, get it done, technical debt, don't worry about it, we'll solve it tomorrow, and I'll hate myself tomorrow because I created all this technical debt, right?
Yeah, it's, I don't know if your listener base is more beginners or experienced programmers or whatever. I appreciate your compliments. That's very kind of you. But a lot of that just comes with time and experience. Many of us, we don't know how to solve a problem until we actually have to sit down and solve the problem. And we hope that Stack Overflow has the answer for us. We hope that we can that the solution is just a Google away, or just a Bing away, or ask Jeeves if you're really old school. But often that's not the case. And so, as software developers, I hope you understand that we enjoy solving these problems and then sharing that knowledge with others. And so it's fun to have an open source library like Sparkle that helps people solve those issues. But it's also a lot of fun to help people with their software solutions when and where you get the chance. So it's been a long road. I've done desktop development for too long, and longer than I know. Well, it's going to be less than 10 years, but which there are probably some people listening who have done it for 20, 30 plus. So I'll sound like a young guy. But just over time, you learn and you grow, and it's up to us as software developers to help others learn and grow as well.
Absolutely. So that goes into a question that I have that you talked about. It's up to us to sort of help give back and help those that are junior to us, to help them sort of figure out how these problems and the solutions come about. Is DotPurple open source? Because you mentioned earlier on there is a paid version. I can imagine that having an open source and a paid version would be difficult to manage as it is.
Okay, yeah. So DotPurple is not open source right now, and that was a business decision made by the company that I contract with. It's a small company at a university that does subcontracting, and so I built it for them, and it costs money for me to build, and so we have wanted to recoup those costs. And so for that reason, DotPurple is you can purchase a license to DotPurple. However, and it's not open source. However, things like your custom project templates, your tool management, your template management, your running, building, publishing, etc. Most of the features are free. And so we really offer the paid license as a way to support us, as a way to further development, and as a way to just say thanks for what we've done. And so, of course, I'm going to sit here and say, please support us. But at the end of the day, what I really want is for people to enjoy the software, to be able to learn from the software, and to be able to get their development work done more quickly. So unfortunately, right now, it's not open source. If someone wanted to donate a bunch of money so that we did open source it, please get in contact with me. But right now, it's not open source.
I mean, that's not a problem. Like you say, it represents a significant time and technology investment from the people who are involved with it. And so, you don't necessarily want to give that away immediately because there is this time, technology, and monetary investment involved. That totally makes sense. I'm very much a proponent for open source, but I'm also very much, I sit here and go, if everything's open, who gets paid? And so I'm not against closed source software, not at all. If it gets the job done, then here's some dollars, help me get the job done. That's not a problem at all. So yeah, I like that. I was just thinking maybe from an education point of view, maybe folks could learn about how it's all put together. But I mean, maybe that could be something you could do as a talk, or maybe just some documentation. Hey, here's how we hung it all together. We're not going to show you the details, but here's how it sort of hangs together. And that could be as valuable as showing the code, right? If you've got a junior who's like brand new to development and they're staring at 5,000 lines of C# code, some people will go, and just close the browser,
Yeah. And that is something that I'm really passionate about is the education. I guess it doesn't matter that I'm passionate about it. But, when we are able to pass on our knowledge to others, we're not just showing that we know more than you. That's not the goal. Mm-hmm. We're actually helping people to become what others have helped us become. Because we all had people above us back in the day who taught us, whether that's your professors or your senior engineers or whatever it is. And so it's I don't want to say it's our moral obligation. That seems a little bit strong. But it's our benefit and privilege to be able to teach others and also not waste our company's time by them fiddling around and not knowing how to do anything.
Sure.
From a practical business perspective.
Sure, I agree. And it just makes sense to be able to mentor or tutor someone and say, hey, look, when I first got into .NET stuff, Link didn't exist, right? And now Link exists. I got to .NET 4 before I'd used any Link stuff. And a developer that I really respect came to me and said, look, okay, you're doing a lot of stuff that you could do with Link, with these extension. Everybody thinks Link is the extension method stuff, the .where.select, but actually it's slightly different. There's a link to SQL, link to whatever. But he came to me and said, look, first of all, let's learn extension methods. Secondly, let's learn what these link extension methods are. And thirdly, once you've done that, you can figure out how to do func-tbool, right? And now that you've done that, you're now a wizard. And I mean, it's a little bit more complex than just those 3 steps, but he took me through those 3 steps and got me to the point where I'm like, oh, cool, I get that now. I totally get it. I get how those projections work. I get how the .NET runtime figures out what I've typed in and how to make that work. So I'm completely with you there. I think that being able to share one's experience and knowledge with someone who is open and receptive to that will allow them to then go, oh, wow, this whole new world has opened up for me. I'll go have a look, regardless of whether they use that knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, if it's not useful to us personally, we can always post a self-answered Stack Overflow question.
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, so as we sort of get to the point where we're wrapping up, where can folks go to learn more about .NET-Purple, to learn more about you, and learn about all of the related technologies we've talked about there, the NetSparkle, that kind of thing, and Avalonia, I guess. I know you're not a representative of Avalonia, but you mentioned it a few times. Maybe you have some resources for people to get started.
Yeah, so for the software first, I guess, our website is .purple.io. So DOTPURPLE, full stop, IO, or just Google .purple, one word. You'll come up with our website. On our website, there's links to our Twitter, where you can communicate with us a little bit more easily, as well as our GitHub, where that open source tool list is, in case you want to submit your tool so that it's or not featured in the software, but available in the software list of .NET tools. So that's .purple. For myself, you can find me on GitHub or Twitter. My alias is DeadPickle, and I'll spell that for you, DeadPikle. There's no C in the word pickle. It's a long story. And so get in touch with me there. NetSparkle Updater is available on my GitHub. You'll see it. It's right in front and center. So if you want to get involved in that project, please, contributions are very much welcome. All open source MIT license. Avalonia is available at avaloniaui.net. If you Google that as well, I'm pretty sure their GitHub will pull up. And at the top of their README on GitHub is a Gitter chat room. They have a Discord and a bunch of other resources for you. It's a super friendly community. I know that when I was developing .purple, I ran into some issues and asked some questions. Developers were answering back. They were really good about talking, really friendly. And if you have the opportunity, you can also contribute back because it's open source. Avalonia is completely open source. And so if there's something that's missing, well, why not go build it yourself?
Sure, that sounds good. I'll make sure to put links to all of these into the show notes. So it won't be the show notes that are downloaded to your podcatcher. So if you are listening to this, click through to read those, then there'll be a link to the full show notes for this with a full transcription. Unfortunately, it's a machine transcription, so parts of it will be wrong. And then at the bottom of that, there'll be links for resources and stuff. I don't think it's called links for resources and stuff, but it'll be called something like that. And there'll be all of those links that Michael just mentioned. I'll make sure that they are in those show notes so that then if you're driving, you don't have to worry about how do I write this down. If you're out for a jog, oh no, I haven't got a pen and paper or whatever, you don't have to put yourself in danger is what I'm saying. All of that will be stored for you, no worries. Excellent. Okay, well, I guess all that really remains to say, Michael, is that thank you ever so much for being on the show, for talking about .purple, giving us a little intro to Avalonia, talking about NetSparkle, talking about segregation of concerns, talking all the things that you've talked about. Thank you ever so much for being on the show and talking about them.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here on the podcast and enjoyed being able to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time and for your efforts in putting out this podcast. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem. This is why I put the show out, right? I love to talk to people who are passionate about the stuff that they make, and that they can use that as a, I don't want to say excuse, but use that as a great way of teaching other people and showing people how, like you said, how do we hang all of this stuff together and solve all of these problems. It's a great way to do that. But yeah, so thank you very much. That was my interview with Michael Babienco about DotPurple. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.